Well, for more analysis now, let's bring in aviation expert Jeffrey Thomas. Jeff, thanks so much for your time today. What's your read on what went so wrong in South Korea?
Well, certainly the bird strike is an issue. There's two elements to that. First of all, air traffic control warned the pilots of a flock of birds. These are mallard birds that frequent this particular area at this time of the year. A minute after they issued that warning to the pilots of the aircraft issued a mayday. At exactly the same time as that happened, the critical air traffic control data that comes from the aircraft, it's called ADSB. This tells air traffic control the altitude, speed, direction, etc. of the aircraft. That's how they track them. That turned off at 900 feet. Now, that never turns off until the aircraft gets to the gate and to the terminal. So this flags possible electrical failures. We know that from a video that at least one engine was impacted by the bird strike. Observers on the ground suggested there were actually several explosions, so possibly multiple bird strikes. Then the aircraft was directed to abort that particular approach and go to the other end of the airport and approach from the other direction, from the north. That happened. And then we have a video now that's come out showing the aircraft approaching that runway without the flaps set for landing. So the flap settings, there's about 8 of them on the 737. The first flap setting was loaded, but the final flap setting of 35 degrees flap was not, and that would slow the aircraft up considerably. And the aircraft has landed well down the 3,000-metre runway without the undercarriage deployed, and that's possibly due to this electrical or hydraulic problems associated with the bird strike or cascading failures in the cockpit. The crew could have cranked that down, but if they were suffering engine problems, then they probably had to get the aircraft on the ground as soon as possible, and they didn't have a chance to do that. And sadly, the aircraft ran along the runway, exited the runway, and impacted the localizer structure. The localizer is a directional mechanism for the airport, and that was about 1,000 feet or 300 meters from the end of the runway and blew up. So what we're looking at probably here is multiple failures due to a bird strike.
And Jeff, how much time would the pilots have had to react when they've been told about that possible bird strike activity and then they have mechanical issues is the speculation? How much time do they have to react and make a decision? And is there any sort of manual overrides they can do?
So we understand there was only 1 minute between the warning of the birds and the calling of the mayday. So we're talking 60 seconds between the two events. Now, air traffic control would never have advised of just one bird. They would have advised of a flock of birds. So my sense is this was a multiple bird strike.
And what about the landing gear? Much has been made of the fact that that wasn't out as they were coming towards the tarmac. Is there a way, if there's mechanical issues, for them to override that and manually get them down?
Look, indeed, truly there is. It can be hand cranked down, but that takes a little bit of time. And if there was these, let's make the assumption there was multiple bird strikes, and indications are that there were because of the ground observers, the visual observation, the ADSB cutting out. We're dealing with multiple failures here, and they possibly didn't have time to crank it down. It's the sort of thing that what would happen, the pilots would fly away from the airport to a holding position and then crank the undercarriage down, then return to the airport for a normal landing. They didn't have time to do that.
And I wanted to ask you about those shocking pictures of the plane hitting the concrete wall. For the uninitiated, a lot of people would say, well, why is that wall there? Obviously, there's a reason why airports have those concrete barriers at the end. But without that, would that have been a fundamentally different circumstance, do you think?
Oh, look, absolutely. Well, let's get this very clear because there's quite a bit of speculation about this. the concrete wall, it was housing what's called the localizer, and that's an air traffic control. That's a location mechanism for the aircraft. So that was located 300 metres or 1,000 feet beyond the end of the runway, which is compliant with International Civil Aviation Organization rules. Now, just beyond that is a road and a ditch. So it would have hit the ditch. If it didn't hit the wall, it would have hit the ditch, it would have hit the road. And look, the impact might not have been quite as bad, but it would have been pretty bad. So,
Jeffrey,
with all airports, they do come to an end at some stage, and as long as they comply with international rules, then they are considered safe and adequate.
Yeah, Jeffrey Thomas, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate that level of detail. Just a tragic circumstance there, thinking of all the families in South Korea.